And good evening. Welcome to the Mayor and City Council Workshop for the City of Taneytown for the month of February 2023. We'll begin with our pledge to the flag. I'll ask Councilwoman Cheney to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you, Councilwoman. Let the record reflect that all council members are present and accounted for. Councilman Haynes is with us virtually on camera this evening. We'll begin with our review of the minutes of the January 4th and January 9th meetings. Is there any comments or amendments to be made to these minutes as presented this evening? Right, hearing nothing additional for those, they will be up for your approval on Monday evening. I'll now ask members of council if they are conflicted on anything on the agenda this evening.
No.
All right, all is well. We will open it up for public comment for non-agenda items. If you'd like to speak to myself and council about anything not on this piece of paper, feel free to do so now.
Chris Tillman, 10 York Street. I do have one kind of, it's a little on the odd side, and this is really addressed to the police department. There has been lately, over the last week and a half, a white pickup truck that has been running up and down York and Frederick Streets, gun in his motor, smoking tires. This is a real situation, and could we please get some enforcement? This usually happens 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. Corporal Schaefer is nodding his head. I think he knows what we're talking about, but it's really an issue for the folks on York Street. Thank you.
You said around 9 and 10 o'clock every evening it's occurring? Or?
Not every evening, and sometimes it's later than that. It's just, there's no...
In that range.
There's no pattern to it.
Whenever the spirit moves them, okay. Thank you, sir, for that information. Any other members of the public like to come up and speak this evening? All right, with nothing else, we shall move on with the meeting. Up for introduction, we're going to have Ordinance 04-2023, Budget Amendment Number 3, and I'll ask Mr. Wieprecht if you're going to guide us through what we have in front of us.
Sure can. So there are amendments to both the general and the utility fund. There are two versions of the general fund amendment in your packet. The first one includes the cost for construction drawings and a site plan for the police department expansion. That came in considerably higher than we had envisioned based on the plans that we had for this building's renovation. But again, the footprint of the police department would be changing, and the level of work is going to require that we also do a site development plan. So we're looking at roughly $130,000 for that if we choose to move forward with it. So in this scenario, we've realized $10,000 more in local revenue from income tax. Our share of income taxes has come in a bit over budget so far. So we're going to bump up the revenue by $10,000 to recognize that overage on the revenue. Also, in this case, if we do move forward with the police department plans, we would have to take $70,000 from the general fund to make up the shortfall to pay for that. The other $60,000 could be pulled from police pension employer contribution because we've been short-staffed, as you know, and so we haven't been making the payments as budgeted because we've had smaller staff to make those payments for. So $60,000 from there and $70,000 from the general fund would offset the architecture and site development plans for the police department addition. The other increase in expenses is $10,000 for stormwater as-built certification. You'll recall that one of our projects this year was to clean out and restore the Bancroft Street stormwater management pond to its original condition. This is the first time it's been cleaned out in 30 years, so we've gotten a good life out of it. But we have not been able to locate as-built certification from the engineers from 30 years ago. And we need to have that on file for our NPDES permit with the county. Well, as administered by the state, but we're on a joint permit with the county. So we really needed to have the as-built done, and the cost for that is $10,000. So that's offset really by that increase in interest. So the second version of the general fund amendment just shows the $10,000 income increase and the $10,000 stormwater fee or as-built fee. So that nets itself out without having to dip into the general fund. So basically, we can choose to move forward with option A or B, with or without the police station plans, and knowing that some other things were put on hold pending the selection and appointment of a new chief. Wasn't sure which way you would want to go on that. So we can decide Monday night on that if you want to include that or not. If not, it's a pretty straightforward. The increase in local revenue from interest income is enough to offset the cost of doing those stormwater drawings. On the utility fund.
Let's talk about that one
Okay.
before we move on.
Okay.
What did we budget in this current fiscal year for the police department plans?
I think we had, I don't know if we even, I don't think we even had it in the budget. We didn't expect it to be a large expense, and we talked about including it in our budget amendment, but that was also expecting it to be a much smaller number, and hoping that we could absorb it by other areas where we've not expended monies as we expected to.
I don't think it's so pressing that it needs to go as a budget amendment, whereas we're about to start working on the budget for next fiscal year. I think it's more appropriate to put that off and put it into next year's budget instead of amending this one for something we didn't have in there originally. That's my take on it. Members of council, do you have any additional input to that or your feelings?
I agree too.
Okay,
Okay,
all righty. We will go with the simple one then.
very good. And then utility fund you had?
Okay. Yep. Okay. This one is just basically cleaning up what we forgot to roll over to the current fiscal year. The Meadowbrook Interceptor, sewer interceptor project, we completed the first phase of the project last year. And when we did this year's budget, we didn't remember that we intended to use the same project number, and that we had phase 2 of that project yet to go. So we forgot to roll over the remainder of that project into the current year's budget. So this is basically just taking from utility fund balance for capital project. So we're increasing the revenue by pulling from that source, and then we're adding the $500,000 to complete the phase 2 of the Meadowbrook Sewer Interceptor. So again, it's money that we should have just carried forward into this year's budget from the utility fund, utility capital. And we talked about this a few months ago when we
thought we
had
did.
the.
It sounds
right.
familiar.
Yeah, we talked about this when we did the bid openings for the sewer rehabilitation project, that this would need to be amended to cover that project.
Right. Any questions from members of council? Okay, then that amendment package will be up for your approval on Monday evening. Up to be introduced Monday evening, excuse me. Up for adoption Monday evening will be Resolution 2023-03. This is our water allocation for the month of February. I did the job of former Mayor Pro Tem Vigliotti, and the numbers do check out.
Oh, you had an easy one.
I did, I know. I won't have to tell you how many times I did it to make sure it was right. No, I'm kidding. Any questions on the water allocations? All right, that will be up for your adoption Monday evening then. Next up, we have our city manager report. Mr. Weeprick, what do you have for us this evening?
Okay. In your packets this month is a draft capital equipment program. That's the first item that's been kind of sitting on the list for quite some time. So it's a six-year program, largely vehicles. We're in a situation right now where we have been catching up on replacing some aged equipment in DPW, and they're in a pretty good situation right now, so we don't have a huge list of capital equipment. For the police department, well, I'll just take it in order if you scroll past my report. Police capital is, at this point, it's all just the replacement of vehicles, and in 2026, potentially an additional police cruiser in the event that we do have the department grow again with another officer, and that may be contingent on growth of the city and how quickly that happens, as we have one small residential project in the pipeline and two major ones pending. So depending upon when we start to see the growth of that, we'll likely have to add a police officer to maintain our adequate public facilities ordinance standard. And that may be in 2026, but we won't be sure until those plans get through the development pipeline and start to actually build houses. So that one might float a year one way or the other. But basically, it's just replacing two vehicles a year. We did talk a little bit about a trailer-based radar speed sign, but that may not be, and again, we thought it'd be better just to wait for the new chief to decide if that's something that they want to invest in. But what we'd like to do is refine this as we work through our budget process this year, along with doing an update to the capital improvement program so that everything stays in sync each year when we adopt the budget. We'll kind of do these rolling forward a year each time as we do our budget process. But moving on from the police capital, we get into sewer capital. This one has a couple of the bigger ticket items. So we'd like to get rid of a rubber tire loader that's out at the treatment plant that was purchased in the early 80s. And we'd like to replace that. Instead of getting another loader, we'd like to get a pettibone, which is basically like a forklift with a big boom. So we find that the existing loader is often used with forks on the front, like a forklift instead of a bucket. And that the pettibone will get us a better reach, and also can be equipped with a basket so that we can have staff use it as a lift and things like that. Also in 2025, like to replace our televising system, our sewer camera. The current camera does break down rather frequently, and it's got quite a few years on it now, and the technology has advanced dramatically. So the images that we get, like when we hired utility services to do the cleaning and televising as part of our sewer rehabilitation to decide which lines were candidates for replacement versus relining, the images that we got from that are just head and shoulders above what we get with our kind of outdated equipment. We've talked about possibly, since the city is growing, we try to televise a third of the system each year. If we want to keep doing that in-house, this item might become a more expensive item to get higher-end equipment. But we might look at outsourcing and hiring, contracting out to have someone like Utility Services come in, televise, and be gone in, a week or two, rather than have Public Works trying to chip away at it, when they have a chance. And it's been challenging for them to keep up with a third of the city every year. And as we grow, it's only going to get bigger. So we're contemplating the cost benefit and man hours and everything for possibly contracting that out. We would still want to replace the sewer camera, just because, again, it is very
The
old and
demos,
it's
when we have to, right.
proving, to have some reliability issues these days. But if we do opt to go and outsource for like the routine televising and then just to televising when we have a problem, when we have a blockage or, something that we need to just get out there in the field and do it right away, we still need to have that kind of equipment. But we don't need top of the line stuff for that function. So, but again, that would be for the year after next, if we're able to do that. And the big ticket one there on the sewer capital is a vac truck. So we currently have a sewer jetter that's mounted on a trailer that the guys use to, blast out blockages in the sewer system. And that's really about all that it does. The vac truck would be able to do this, but can also be used for cleaning manholes, storm drain inlets, and it can also do kind of targeted excavation where basically the water pressure will turn the soil into a slurry, and then it also vacuums it out of the hole. So when we have water main repairs where we have to dig up the street, we currently use a front end loader and scoop out large areas that the bucket. It takes a rather big hole to get down to ultimately what is usually a foot or 2 foot crack in a pipe. Something like a vac truck would be able to, and again, our ability to pinpoint the problem is important here as well. But you could excavate a smaller hole in the pavement and basically jet out a smaller hole than we can do with the loader, and reduce the paving costs to do the street restoration when that's done. But also, rather than having somebody hand dig once you get close to the pipe, you could basically blast the water in, turn the soil to slurry, and vacuum it out, more quickly than a guy down in the pit with a shovel throwing it, from one end of the pit to the next until he finds the spot. So it's kind of a versatile piece of equipment, but it does have a pretty lofty price tag.
Because as opposed to a trailer-mounted unit, it's an actual vehicle.
Yes, yes, this would be like a commercial-sized truck.
Right.
Yes.
Do they expect any issues by it being a truck of accessing all of the areas that they would need to? I know it's on a trailer, it's a little easier to get that back to manholes or such are a little out of the way. Do they expect to have some problems having a large vac truck to do that with?
Right, that is an area of concern. So because we do have some, some sewer lines that are in far from paved areas.
Right.
And, even those though, we would have challenge getting the trailer in. But certainly the vac truck is going to be a lot heavier than a utility truck pulling a trailer. So, but I think that would be the big difference, I think, would be the weight. So,
Right.
but we do run into that situation now, even with the trailer.
Right.
That there are areas that we just, have to pull hoses, and get the trailer as close as we can to it.
I just want to make sure that's been thought through to the point where
Yeah.
we're not back in 4 years because now they need a jetter because this won't
Right.
get in those tight spots.
Yes.
That's
Yep.
whether they need to make sure they have sufficient hoses for the vac truck to reach anywhere they need to without sacrificing suction.
Yeah.
something we need to think ahead on so we're not caught unaware.
Would the jetter be at its end of life in 2027, or could it hang about?
Well, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
Do we know end of life on the jetter? Or?
I do not, but I can certainly get the estimate for Monday night. But again, this is not for any action right now.
I understand,
but yeah.
right.
But yeah, those are certainly good thoughts, and I suspect DPW has already contemplated that.
Oh, I'm sure
I
they
may
have.
not be.
Yeah.
Problem solvers.
Okay.
So, okay, next up is street capital. That's where basically the replacement of vehicles, pickup trucks, the utility body trucks, salt spreaders are large enough expenses that we would capitalize them, so they're going to be on the capital equipment. So replacement pickup truck in 2024, we do hope to intend to trade in the small dump truck and get a larger capacity, but not as big as the
The dump
the
truck.
right the international that we purchased recently. So this would still be like an F550 type, but a larger capacity than we have now. If the guys use that for a water main repair, two buckets from the loader and it's over capacity, and they're going back to the site in the park where we dump that material, with the truck bed sagging pretty good. So I'd like to get one with a little better capacity. And we've also had some issues with that particular truck that we'd like to get rid of it while it still has some value. And moving on, salt spreader, our bucket truck is a 1997, so we have an eye to replace that in a couple of years. And then we're getting back to the utility trucks. Much beyond the 2025, because now we're specifying aluminum utility bodies. The hope is that we can actually reuse that, repaint and reuse that utility body and just get a new truck chassis. So, we did spend more to get the aluminum bodies, but we're hoping that we can actually use them for the life of two trucks. But we don't have numbers yet on that, cab and chassis replacement. So that's why this one only goes out to 2025. And then moving over to water, not a whole lot there. Emergency generator for field work, just to be able to power lights and things like that when we have, water main breaks or things that the guys need to come out at night. And we do have spotlights on some of the trucks, but when you're, down in a hole digging, for a water main or something, they may not be able to direct the light where you really need it because you might not be able to get the truck that close to the hole. Also, for the water billing system, the interrogator is the unit that they use when they drive around and get the radio reads from the water meters. So we would like to move forward with a system that will allow us to remotely read meters from the city office. So we could save on manpower from having somebody go out and do the different routes that they have to basically make, laps of different parts of the city to read the meters throughout the city. We would need to update some water meters in order to do that. So DPW is looking into how many meters would need to be replaced to make that a feasible advancement. But that would also be very helpful because currently when we get a final read request, say a house is going to settlement, we go out and read the meter right before settlement so that we know, and the settlement company knows, the seller gets billed for the water usage up to that point, and then we have a zero balance for the new owner. Or when a tenant moves out and the landlord wants to, zero out that water balance for the former tenant, we go out, we have to send somebody out, even though they don't have to go in the property in most cases, we still have to send somebody out with the interrogator to read the meter. So if we had this system, when we get a final read request, the ladies in the front office can just put in the address, and see what the usage is. So there are some benefits to moving forward with that, but we still need to do a little more homework on how many of our meters would need to be replaced. And the other item in there is to replace a 2007 backhoe. It's getting older, and we are seeing more repairs with it, so we'd like to kind of get out of that before reliability really becomes an issue. And that would be, replacing it when it's 19 years old. So that's what's kind of on tap for the capital equipment at this point. And as I said, we can kind of refine this and provide a little more detail if as needed as we go along with the budget process this year.
Question I have about the interrogator replacement. Can we see a better cost analysis on that to see at what point that actually saves us money?
Sure.
If it's a matter of 2 or 3 years, I understand. If it takes us 10 years to recover that amount of money, then I don't know if I understand the convenience of it.
Sure.
But right now, we're trying to find ways to
Yeah.
cut expenses.
And we've had some conversations about
Right,
that, because it's not like we have somebody riding around the city every day doing this.
right.
It does take, I'll say the equivalent of several days' effort to read the meters,
Right.
and upload everything. But we only do it once every 90 days.
Right.
So, so we can come up with a return on
But
investment for that.
there's the vehicle and the expense associated, and
Exactly.
generally there's, I
Yeah.
guess, 2 guys in the vehicle while they're doing it, one with the interrogator, the other one trying not to run into things. So, okay.
So, yeah, but we can crunch some numbers on that.
Okay.
Yep.
That would be, I think, important information for council to have. Anything else from your report, sir?
Yes. So we've been talking about charter and code updates, a lot about community village recently. So the community village overlay was talked about at the last planning commission meeting, and they provided consensus on having that relief that we talked about last month on the single-family and semi-detached houses, giving them the relief from the alley requirement, but still requiring the alleys to be in attached dwelling areas like townhomes or quads or things like that. So if there's interest in moving forward, we can work that up as an ordinance perhaps next month for introduction if council's interested in that. But the planning commission did overall agree with what we kind of wrapped up with last month.
Was there discussion to make that concession, because we're doing this as an option, correct, that they could go this route? Or are we looking to change the ordinance altogether?
This would allow a developer not to have to do alleys when building a single-family or semi-detached house.
Okay. Is there a
It doesn't,
sacrifice involved in that as well?
no,
Okay.
this just eases the alley requirement.
Okay.
And if I recall correctly from last month, consensus was that we didn't want to get into incentivizing or giving density bonuses to do the alleys, but rather just, that we were okay with the single families and the duplex semi-detached not having them, but we still wanted to see them for anything with a higher density.
Right. I'm thinking we could go along the lines of, to take advantage of this, there has to be a higher percentage of green space, there has to be, or open space, something along those lines, as opposed to them redesigning it and packing more in now that there's more space available with less alleys. And I mean, I feel like it's kind of counter to what we're trying to do at that point. So I think there should be a talk of, changing the required open space if they choose to go this route. Members of council, do we have an opinion?
Do you want an ordinance that states that?
Well, I think if we give them the option, if you'd rather not do the alleys, you can go this route but you have to increase your open space.
Would you do that by percentages?
We could come up with our method of doing that, yeah.
We can,
I mean, it's a percentage
can-
now, correct? The open
we can,
space?
yeah, we can take a look at that and structure it so there's some option there.
Right,
Right, so if you don't want to do the alleys, here's what, right.
right. That's my thought.
That seems to be what a lot of the community villages do elsewhere with their gazebos and large
Gathering
area,
areas.
kind of in a central circle or square.
I mean, it's generally a benefit all around by not having alleys for everybody. I mean, you're looking at less impervious surface, you're looking at less maintenance involved.
Yeah. We'll take a look at that.
Okay,
Yep, okay.
there's got to be a carrot somewhere.
Sure.
you know, it's-
So also under the charter and code review, we met with, Planning Director Hale and I met with Brian Lubenow from CDM Smith, and we talked a bit about our stormwater management ordinance. And I talked several months ago about the A-Storm, Advancing Stormwater Resiliency in Maryland, where it looks like we're going to have to, that there's probably going to be a new state standard for stormwater management that, you know, you'll either adopt the model ordinance or your ordinance will have to include, you know, basically the components of the model ordinance in some way. So we did this, gosh, 8 or 9 years ago maybe, and that's when we had to start doing environmental site design to the maximum extent practicable. So that took us from doing like the big regional ponds to trying to do rain gardens and things like that. We haven't had any residential subdivisions that have had to go by that ESD or environmental site design yet. At any rate, it's looking like the state stormwater requirements are going to be looking at, in response to the, you know, higher intensity rainfalls that we're seeing and the frequent flooding that's been occurring around the state, it looks like the stormwater standards are going to change again. But, so we don't want to do a complete rewrite, but we have been seeing a number of, I'll call them in-between projects. So things that are maybe taking a residential project, putting it into commercial use, or a commercial property where they're doing a small addition or something that doesn't trigger a lot of the environmental regulations. If you stay under 5,000 square feet of disturbance, typically you're not required to do erosion and sediment control plans, you're not required to do a grading plan, you're not required to do stormwater management. So we sometimes see, and I'll use a site that most people will be familiar with, I guess, on East Baltimore Street. LaFavor Construction was a business here, and, you know, for many, many years. They converted a residence to their office. So, and when they did that, they paved a portion of the property adjacent to Merwin Drive. They didn't pave 5,000 square feet. I don't believe at the time they were required to do a site development plan either because, again, they weren't disturbing 5,000 square feet of area. But we've got, say, 1,500 square feet of pavement that didn't have stormwater management. Right. Now the property has been sold to new owners who want to convert it to a carry-out restaurant, Bellissimo's. With that, they're proposing another, say, 3,500 square feet of impervious area, creating a new driveway and some additional parking. So now we end up having probably over 5,000 square feet of pavement that didn't used to be there, and none of it had to address stormwater.
Right.
And we see projects like this all the time. And often it's, well, you don't need to do stormwater management, you don't need to do erosion and sediment control, you're not going to have any impact on water and sewer, so this is probably a good candidate for a site development plan waiver. And so we waive, you know, trying to be business friendly, we waive the site plan requirements sometimes, if the intensity of the use isn't something that's concerning. But even if you don't waive that requirement, we're not requiring stormwater. And we've seen instances where, properties have come back years, maybe years apart, but, they want to pave an extra 3,000 square feet and they don't do stormwater for it. Well, maybe combined with what's already on the site, now you've got 11,000 square feet or something. And in the end, the concern is, as our NPDES regulations get tighter and tighter with each permit cycle, much as we have to currently retrofit for 20% of untreated impervious, we're letting people develop more and more impervious, that as the regulations tighten in the future, who's going to end up paying for that when we end up having to treat, the cumulative result of these little, 3,000 and 4,000 square foot areas? So we'd like to do something with the stormwater management ordinance that speaks to this, that lets us look at things in a cumulative fashion. So at least for commercial, for non-residential properties. So because that's where, if you're adding 3 parking spaces, that's a, pretty good chunk of pavement. For the most part, we see people that want to extend their driveway to park one more car. People put pools in backyards, things like that. But usually the scale of that is much more modest than these commercial things where they're doing, 1,000, 2,000 square feet at a time.
Right.
So we'd like to modify the ordinance to try to catch these so that in the long run, the city doesn't end up having to go back and, do more retrofits or do more water quality treatment to offset the things that we made easy, for the developers. So if there's, and mull it over, but, if we can have some direction Monday night as to whether that's something to consider. Another thing with regard to the stormwater management regulations is there is more current rainfall data that could be used, that following our existing ordinance, we're using really outdated rainfall data. So we'd like to incorporate some more modern standards by reference into the ordinance than we have now. So there's data from the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that is much more current than the standards that we've been using. So we feel like we're kind of using outdated rainfall data to tell engineers to design this stuff, and we're reviewing it under, rain data that's not reflecting what's really happening today. So, and we know that eventually new regulations are going to be prompted by this A-storm effort in Maryland. But in the meantime, we might catch some of these smaller projects. And also, if we can do this fairly quickly, we can maybe catch the next couple major subdivisions that come through and at least make sure that they're using more current rainfall data when they design their stormwater facilities. So it's a lot, I know.
I want to go back to your talk of coming up with a cumulative concept. Have you researched or seen that in use in any other jurisdictions?
I have not yet.
Okay. Is there I think something else to look into for that is maybe not cumulative, but based on how much they pave, there's a fee that goes into an account to tackle those things. An interest-bearing account that we can kind of have reserved for those projects in the future is another thought I have.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
okay.
And that would, right, I mean, yes, that's certainly a good thought.
Okay. I don't know at what rate you come up with such a thing, but that might be of a benefit to us as well. It might be easier than trying to do cumulative only in the way that, now we're telling a new business, well, the people before you put this much in, and now you're going to be paying for what they did. So,
Sure.
that would be my opinion on that.
Right.
All right, do you have anything else for us this evening?
Okay. Roberts Mill Road and Broad Street. Met with the contractor, county grading inspector, and state NPDES inspector. So the contractor's going to be moving forward with stakeout and erosion and sediment controls, at least for the initial phases of the work. They're not going to stake out and like put silt fence up all along the stretch of Roberts Mill Road. They're just going to do it phase by phase, and the grading inspector was comfortable with that approach. So we should see things starting with that in the next couple weeks. I did have a call of concern about the crosswalk at Baumgartner Avenue, and we've talked about this off and on over the years, that the request was made again to restore a crossing guard at that intersection. And it wasn't so much that the intersection itself is unsafe, but apparently the behavior of the kids crossing has been causing some problems. So I have asked the police department, asked Major Mitchell to try to increase our presence out there, but apparently we have, by report, a lot of kids just crossing while the light is green for Baltimore Street.
Right.
And basically playing chicken with cars on a pretty regular basis. So just wanted to pass that on. I expected somebody to be here to speak to that during the non-agenda items, but I guess they weren't able to make it. Let's see, the other thing, so we did add a new business item that we'll get to a little later for the lighting project down in the park. Realized that the cross brackets for the lights are going to be mounted on are shot. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in new business. Did want to call you to your attention that we have made the move to .gov domain. So currently, if people still type in taneytown.org or email you at taneytown.org, it will still go through, but it's being redirected to .gov. And this is going to afford us some additional security that we don't have now. And you can only get a .gov domain if you really are a government. So as the mayor can attest, that there were some hurdles
They don't make it easy, that's for sure.
to get through this. But things are in place now for it. And also, one of the big benefits is that the registrar gives us protection from, and Dan had to explain what this was to me, but distributed denial of services. So that would be basically where you get just slammed with requests that hit your server and basically crash your server because you get too much traffic hitting it. So this gives us a little bit of gives us additional protection there. And just want to give everybody a heads up that I don't have a date yet, but in the not too distant future, we're probably going to be moving to two-factor authentication for remote access for everything. So when you go to do stuff on your Surface, the idea would be you would get a code on your cell phone. And definitely if you were using any device that wasn't a city-issued device. So that may be coming our way soon. So just trying to increase our security. And, unfortunately, there might be a little inconvenience for some things, but we just really need to be mindful that attacks are getting more frequent and more difficult to recover from. So
Right.
That's kind of always on the forefront for our IT department. Let's see, okay. I think that covers it.
All right.
Well, I guess Dan will let us know.
Yes.
When we have to give people the .gov address or.
Right, so everything is automatic at this point. So if you type in, taneytown.org to go to the website, it'll still open up our website, but it'll say taneytown.gov. And
I think
your
it's
emails.
TaneytownMD.gov.
MD, sorry,
think
yes, taneytownmd.gov. So when we get around to ordering, replacement business cards, we'll
Yeah.
put the new email addresses on those. but the existing ones will work fine.
Okay.
You know, so you will still get your emails and everything like that. So we will continue to support the .org for the foreseeable future as well. But years down the road, we may not. So it's kind of a long-term, you know, a slow transition.
Okay.
Very good. Councilman Haynes, I believe you had some questions for the city manager this evening?
I do, yes. My internet connection out here is still a little spotty, so if I drop, please bear with me. It shouldn't take long for me to come back. So I just had two questions for Jim tonight. Really just getting information. So one is about parking and the other is about trash collection. So the first one, I just wanted to get some general information about some recent concerns regarding the plausibility of expanding handicap accessible parking in the downtown. And I understand that ADA compliant parking is tricky, especially considering that most of the parking for our downtown businesses is street parking. But I just wanted to know if in the near future we could get a little more information on that. And then my final question deals with ecology. So a lot of complaints have been fielded online recently regarding ecology's level of service. And I just wanted to know the extent to which we've continued setting expectations with ecology since renewing their agreement, and just a refresher, if possible, on what sort of penalty and worst case scenario severance clauses exist within it. And then before we get into it, I just wanted to put out a friendly public reminder that any complaints regarding trash service can only be rectified if formally placed with City Hall. I understand that it's convenient to have a public official hear your complaints on social media or online, but in order for them to be actionable, they must be made by contacting City Hall. So that's all I have, the parking and.
Okay. So I will do a little homework to have more detail on those, perhaps for Monday night. We have generally shied away from trying to create on-street handicap spaces, largely because it's hard to provide an accessible route. Particularly for the downtown area, our streets have flat curb, so we would have to identify a suitable spot where we would be able to meet the slope requirements and basically provide an accessible ramp. So it does get to be quite a project to provide even just one parking space. Those of you who have been around for a while may recall some discussion about our post office and the lack of handicap accessibility as far as parking opportunities there.
Right.
And as you can, probably picture, there's a bit of a slope to the road there, as does the sidewalk. And for an ADA compliant parking space, you need to have it basically level. I think it's 2% slope or less. And you're supposed to also have an accessible route as far as like your site design goes. So trying to retrofit that to our downtown would be very challenging. That's not to say that we can't look at, providing off-street spaces somewhere. And certainly if we are able to develop any downtown parking, we'll take that, we'll provide handicap parking with that. But to do it on-street can be problematic. So I can get some details for Monday night or next month.
And Jim, I'd love to help you with getting that information together.
Okay, all right.
So when it comes to ecology services, I think I understand the frustration when things are damaged. And when it comes to us penalizing ecology, will only happen when they do not follow through with replacement of cans. And they have been really good about doing that. So if a can is damaged, let us know, we track it. Kevin has a whole list tracking all the complaints that we receive. And then he goes to them and it's up to them to fulfill the request. And so far they've been very good at doing so. So I don't see a reason to penalize if they're following through on what is expected of them. So I understand cans get damaged. I understand that.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Cheney understands that for sure. But they do follow through. And so I can't penalize them for doing that. But I do understand the frustration. It's an ongoing conversation we have with them. The challenge we've had is just the rotating cast of employees that they have there. We rarely have the same crew working the city week to week, and that's challenging.
Yeah, and we have advised them that, if we see, and generally, as the mayor said, when a problem comes to our attention and we notify the vendor, and I'm looking at the term here, so project manager for ecology services. So our director of public works notifies their project manager, and generally the issues do get resolved. Now, there have been some instances where it took much longer, and those unfortunately were linked to turnover of staff at ecology services that, a can was supposed to be replaced and then somebody left and didn't pass on, the need to do that to the next person. So it sat until the resident called and said, hey, I thought you guys were replacing my can. And then that started it moving again. So sometimes we aren't aware that the final resolution hasn't been made if the customer doesn't call us or make it known. But generally, we report the issues and they get resolved, and usually in a reasonable time. So in those instances, we're not going to fine them the $25 per occurrence or per container, because, when we let them know, they take care of it. But we can do some stats on that, though, because Kevin is tracking that, so.
All right, Councilman Haynes, follow up?
Yes. How many complaints has Kevin received about cans being discourteously replaced, in terms of they collect the trash and then they throw it on the curb, or they don't put it back neatly? Because I noticed that was also a bulk of the complaints, when people were unhappy with how it seemed like they were carelessly putting the cans back. I understand it's a fast service. You got to go. But has Kevin received a lot of complaints about that? And have we set expectations in that regard?
I will check the log on that. I don't know the specifics.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other questions for the city manager this evening? All right, well, thank you, sir. Are there any questions on the departmental reports as they were presented to you? All right, hearing none, we'll go into new business. First up for approval Monday evening will be our monthly financial report. Are there any questions or comments regarding that this evening? All right, hearing none, I'll request the same of the accounts payables, also up for approval Monday evening. Okay, up for consideration Monday evening is the Habitat for Humanity subsidy request. If you recall from last month, we were presented by Scott Schwartz, thank you. Requesting some sort of relief on hookup fees regarding their project on East Baltimore Street. If you recall that they're building essentially a duplex, am I correct, out on East Baltimore Street. And due to pandemic and other issues, the cost of said project has increased significantly, and they're requesting some sort of relief from the city for that. So I'll open it up for discussion this evening.
Okay, a few days after Scott was here and gave his presentation, of course, he gave us all the breakdown of his costs. And I met with the city manager and treasurer to see where we might draw funds from to help Habitat. My initial thought was to go to our ARPA funds, but the second phase of our funds has already been issued and sort of spoken for. It wasn't that it couldn't be done, but it's like undoing a lot of stuff and
Right.
would get to be a bureaucratic mess.
It would be, yeah.
So during our discussion, it was brought up that we could use funds from the revenue that we get from the cell towers without a problem.
So this is the lease revenue that we receive
Right,
from
that we,
broadband and cellular companies.
exactly. And we do have some excess funds there, where we could assist them. The amount escapes me right now, but
Right, it would be 14,400 per unit.
Per unit.
Right.
so we could do that easily enough. So I'd like to appeal to council to assist, to help them
How
by
much?
using those funds.
How
And
much
they, excuse me.
Go ahead. Yeah.
If we were to approve this, they would definitely understand that this is a one-time only thing, given this situation.
Let me ask a couple questions. We may not have the answers here tonight, I'm sure. That revenue is already in the utility fund, correct? Okay.
Yes.
What is the annual revenue from that source? It's a variety of sources, but
I will see if I can find that on the system. It might be a Monday night thing, though,
okay.
so.
But we don't earmark those funds for anything, correct? They just get put into the
Right,
the
utility
utility fund
savings.
as it is. Okay. Members of council, I'll open it up to you. Other questions or comments?
So 14.4,
Times two.
sorry?
Times
Times
two.
two.
Exactly, that's
28.
what I was gonna confirm, it's 28.
Excuse me.
I was checking the math, and yeah, there you go. So are we looking at an all or nothing, or can we entertain a 50% relief? Are we, if we decide to?
We can do
support-
whatever we want.
That's right. Whatever council votes on
But,
is what's offered.
You know, of course, I would like to do it all as, like I said, a one-time good faith showing for a project such as Habitat.
Yeah.
What was the pre-COVID amount? I know a lot of numbers were presented the evening that Habitat for Humanity shared. I'm just wondering, anybody have that number for what the expectation for the build was? And did they at that time plan to ask for help, or was that just a part of the build?
No, give me 3 seconds. Talk amongst yourselves. I have the information.
I'm sorry, Council, what was your question?
Were they expected to get that money before COVID hit?
And,
Oh,
and
no.
what, and what was, so then what was the amount pre-COVID? Just trying to figure out how much it has increased.
And that's it, I'm not
No,
sure that
this
it's
is the
increased.
hookup for water. That hasn't increased,
Right,
correct?
right, our
Yeah,
right,
they're
our
just-
benefit assessment hasn't
Money's been
increased.
taken from, by so many other charges and fees.
Right.
And everything else.
No, there was no intention to ask for this in the beginning. This is just to help them pay their other fees that have skyrocketed.
And now that they can plan ahead, they shouldn't need
Yes.
to ask again. It was just,
Well,
she said, well.
they will be told not to ask again, but, oh, he has.
I do. I have that. It appears the total increase that they have given is 18% over their pre-COVID figures. With no relief whatsoever, they'll actually be at a loss of almost $6,000 from the project. Councilman, if I can hand this to you, you can peruse that at your leisure.
Thank you.
Yep. So those budget numbers do include the cost to hook up, which is why they're requesting the,
And it's my understanding Habitat for Humanity it's a not-for-profit, true?
that is correct.
Okay. So any local for-profit businesses that might be upset that we would be supporting a not-for-profit. Okay, I'm just getting things straight in my head. I just, when I hear for-profit people upset because they might not have gotten a hookup break, I just hope they know that this is a not-for-profit. Okay,
We always talk whenever we have decisions like this about what precedent we're setting.
sure.
I mean, that's an important thing for us to always consider. This is a somewhat unique circumstance. This is an important project to have here in the city. But whether it's in the best interest of the city to grant this is kind of up for the council to decide. Whether it's all or part, and then there's the second part that we don't have here where they're asking for permission to put up a larger sign as well during the build process. But that's fairly minor compared to $28,000.
$1,000.
Right.
Thank you.
Our budgeted figure for the standpipe, the water tower standpipe rental is $134,580.
Revenue annually
Yes,
for that. Okay.
right. So this month we saw 11,853.
Right. You got it quicker than I did. Thank you. Other questions or discussion we wish to have tonight on this? All right. If not, I will be seeking an answer from you Monday evening. Okay?
And just to point out something that we discussed when we met with Councilwoman Foster, is that by essentially tapping that source, it's not tax dollars that are going towards it. It's rental money that's coming in from the cell companies.
Non-tax revenue, which is a creative way to come up with that
And also
solution.
Tower Stream, which technically isn't a cell company, but same idea.
A broadband company, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, so that's the proposal from Councilwoman Foster. If you'll consider that, and then Monday evening, you can let us know if you want to do all, part, or none at all. It's up to council. All right. With that, we'll move into our next item, which is a special event permit approval for a Veterans Benefit Music Festival at Memorial Park on October 7th of this year. Applicant Music Healing Heroes. Looks like they'd like to have a concert in the area of the gazebo around the tennis courts. Food, just a genuine party, it seems like. Is there any discussion on this application as presented to you? DPW has approved, Police Department has approved. So it'll be up to us on Monday evening. Questions, concerns? Excellent. All right, we spoke earlier about the community village alleyways. We'll go ahead and bring that up again because we're looking for a decision Monday evening, or push it for another month if you'd like to. Is there further discussion on that topic? Was there more you wanted to add, Mr. Weeprick, from your report?
No, I'm good.
Questions, comments? Angry outbursts? Anything? Nothing? Okay. All right. Next, from Parks and Rec, we have approval of sole source procurement for Fern Rodkey Electric. Mr. Weeprick spoke of this earlier. We received grant money to retrofit lights at Field 1, the large baseball field at Memorial Park, with LED lights, which I believe we've done this at the football field already, correct? In the time of doing that, it was discovered by the contractor that the brackets used to mount them are extremely rusty and probably not fit for use any longer, considering they've been there for probably 40-plus years. It's probably a safe bet. So the request is that we now add, what's the figure, $29,500?
Correct.
Okay. Kind of just reading over real quick what the work consists of.
Right.
Removal of old
So the-
rusted steel cross-arm brackets on 8 wooden poles, installation of 16 new galvanized steel cross-arm brackets to match existing cross-arm configuration for new LED lights and hardware. Okay.
So
this,
essentially, the plan was just to replace the lights themselves. And when Rodkey got up there with the bucket truck, they saw that the cross arms were in such deteriorated condition that it wasn't safe to mount the new lights without replacing those cross arms. And they're basically, the project is already started, so it's really not practical
they're
or
stalled at this
advantageous
point.
for us to try to bid it.
yeah. So a dozen tetanus shots later, here we are. How much of the project was covered by the grant? Do we have that information in front of us? And how much is this above that grant?
I do not have it in front of me.
Okay.
I can certainly have it for you Monday night.
Okay. I feel like that would be good information to know, because I would assume if it's above the grant, we're going to look at another budget amendment. Is that safe to assume?
I'll have to check the Parks and Rec budget,
Okay.
see what,
That's
there's
a
not
big hit
much
for
left.
that budget.
There's
so
not much
that's-
left, but,
Right.
right.
That's a big hit for any budget. That's,
And, yeah.
okay.
So at this time, without the replacement, what is the status of the lights? There are no lights on that field?
I don't think they have taken down the old ones yet.
Okay,
But within 5 years, they may come down by themselves,
absolutely,
Well,
yeah,
that's-
absolutely.
which would be less fun to watch happen. Okay, if we can just get a little more information about the funding sources and such, I think that would be beneficial to council. I think it's something we probably need to do. I just think we need all the information as well.
I will look for it if I can find it quickly. We'll do it. I'll tell you tonight, but I'm not sure if I can find it quick enough.
Mayor Pro Tem, do you have anything from the Rec Advisory Board regarding this, or just kind of came
No,
up
I
since the
was
last
just- yeah,
meeting?
My
Yeah.
emails aren't even loading right now. I was gonna see if I could find something in one of the emails.
Okay. Very good. Monday evening, I'm going to move on, and we'll see if Mr. Weeper comes up with anything. I would like to offer 3 appointments for boards and commissions, possibly 4 by Monday, but I'll give you these to consider. The first to the Ethics Commission, a young lady by the name of Linda Canfield has expressed interest in that position. Typo on the agenda, it is not election board, it's actually appointment to Board of Appeals, and that would be Christy Knapp. And lastly, for Parks and Rec Advisory Board, it is Mackenzie Kilby. So those are the 3 names for sure that I'm going to bring Monday evening for your approval to those. I do want to keep you in mind, or let you know, we are still looking for additional people for the Ethics Commission and the Election Board. Through all of the applications we've received, no one really wants to be on the Election Board for some reason.
It's not as much fun.
So if you think of anyone, especially if they have free time the first Monday of May, Election Board needs some people on it. And then I'll follow up with Madam Clerk what other vacancies we may have as well. So there you are. Any other questions, concerns? How do we feel? We're good? All right. With that, I'll open up the floor to public comment on agenda items. If anyone would like to speak on anything on the agenda this evening, now is the opportunity to do so.
Good evening, Chris Tillman again, 10 York Street. Just a question on the meter reading equipment that you're talking about that could read the meters from City Hall. Would that be able to facilitate then a change to monthly billing? You know, one of the issues that a lot of people raise about suddenly high water bills is that they don't find out till 3 months after the fact that they have a leak somewhere, and then they have a $1,500 water bill, and they don't know how that happened. Monthly water bills could at least help that along, that you would know that sooner. If it happens in the first month of a cycle, you know, you're paying for 2 months of a leak that you didn't know necessarily that you had. Just something to think about. If that equipment helps to alleviate part of that issue, there may be some value in that, into your equation of what that equipment is worth. I believe on the community village with the alleyways, I think the mayor is on the right track with if the plan with the alleys reduces the density to a certain number of units, that can't then be increased by eliminating the alleyways. I think that's a really good compromise. On the modification of the stormwater regulations, my question on that is there expiration date for, or some kind of sunset date for prior improvements? For example, if my driveway was built in the 1960s or 70s, and I go to add 3,000 square feet, and there's already 2,000 square feet there, does that then put you, I understand where you're headed with that, but how far back does that reach? Where's the statute of limitations per se on that? Just something to think about for people who've, there's a lot of angles to that. And then lastly, the ADA spaces for downtown accessibility, I agree, is certainly quite an issue. There were 2 spaces marked in the City Hall lot here at one time. Are they no longer marked as ADA compliant spaces?
There's 2.
2? There are 2, right? That's what I thought that there were. So I'm not sure, the person who complained about there not being any ADA parking downtown, I'm not sure.
I think they're talking about on the street, correct?
Right.
Or it may be not convenient to certain businesses,
Right,
perhaps.
and there's at least 2, maybe 3 at the police department as well.
Yeah. And there are 6 or so in the lot back at, over here behind the firehouse. So I'm not sure what that, I just, when they said there weren't any ADA spaces, metered spaces downtown, it's like, wait a minute, I know that there were 2 of them right here. So, okay. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, sir. Any additional public comment this evening on agenda items? All right.
Mr. Mayor, I do have the figures for the lighting.
Yes, Mr. Weeper, what do you have for us?
So Field 1, no, I just bumped my screen. Field 1 was 114,140. Of that, 42,380 was grant funding.
Gotcha. So a little over
So
a third of
71,
it.
right,
Yeah.
71,000 was our part of that.
Okay. Now, that was the budget amount. Was that the bid amount?
That was the budget amount. I don't have the
Okay,
bid
we don't
amount in
have the
front
bid
of me.
amount, right.
Right.
And I don't remember when we looked at the bid to do that. We'll have those numbers for Monday evening for everybody. All right, anything additional? I do have to commend Mr. Weeprick on pulling a lot of information out of thin air this evening for us. That was very well done. All right. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
May I have a second to that motion? And all in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, we are adjourned. See you on Monday.